Wars have been integral to the existence of mankind from time immemorial. We have progressed from ancient to medieval and the modern periods of history, making giant strides towards development in different spheres. But there have been periods when our progress was halted by conflicts, battles, and wars. One such period confronted during the 20th century was undoubtedly the two world wars. Wars have created great heroes as well as martyrs. The soldiers were not only battle weary, they also fought back hunger and starvation and an overall sense of deprivation. We, the students of class 9 and 10, shall take you through the treasure trove of memories related to the Indian soldiers whose contribution to wartime directly and vicariously has been immense. Hereby, I hand over to my friends to take you through the memorabilia of these unsung heroes, the Indian soldiers in the world wars.
As my friend introduced our class topic memorabilia to you, let me take you on the journey through the innumerable photos that we will get as archival material to showcase the invaluable contribution of the Indian soldiers in the First World War. In 1914, the Indian Army was one of the two largest volunteer armies in the world. It had a total strength of 240,000 men, while the British Army had 247,432 regular volunteers at the outbreak of the war. By November 1918, the Indian Army contained 548,311 men, being considered the Imperial Strategic Reserve. It was regularly called upon to deal with incursions and raids in the northwest frontier and to provide garrison forces to the British Empire in Egypt, Singapore, and China. This field force was divided into two armies: the Northern Army, which stretched from northeast frontier to Bengal with 5 divisions and 3 brigades under command, and the Southern Army, which ranged from Baluchistan in the southern India, and it in turn had 4 divisions under command and 2 formations outside the subcontinent. The two armies contained 39 cavalry regiments, 138 infantry battalions, including 20 Gurkha, a joint cavalry infantry unit, the Corps of Guides, 3 sapper regiments, and 12 mountain artillery batteries contributed a large number of divisions and independent brigades to the European, Mediterranean, and Middle East theaters of war in World War I. Over 1 million Indian troops, several overseas of whom 62,000 died, and another 67,000 were wounded. In total, at least 74,187 Indian soldiers died during the war. In World War I, the Indian Army fought against the German Empire in German East Africa and on the Western Front. At the First Battle of Ypres, Indian divisions were also sent to Egypt, Gallipoli, and nearly 700,000 served in Mesopotamia against the Ottoman Empire. While some divisions were sent overseas, others had to remain in India, guarding the northwest frontier and on internal security and training duties. The Indian Army formed and dispatched 7 expeditionary forces overseas during the World War. The presence of the Indian soldiers in different theatres of the Second World War was equally profound. The British Indian Army during World War II began the war in 1939, numbering just under 200,000 men. By the end of the war, it had become the largest volunteer army in history, rising to over 2.5 million men in August 1945. The British officials had no plan for expansion and training of Indian forces, which comprised of about 130,000 men. In addition, there were 44,000 men in British units in India in 1939. As the war progressed, the size and role of the Indian Army expanded dramatically, and its troops were sent to battlefronts as soon as possible. Serving in divisions of infantry, armor, and a fledgling airborne force, they fought in 3 continents in Africa, Europe, and Asia. The British Indian Army of 1939 was different from the British Indian Army during World War I. It had been reformed in 1922, moving away from single battalion regiments to multi-battalion regiments. Women's Auxiliary Corps, India. The Women's Auxiliary Corps was formed in May 1942. Recruits had to be a minimum age of 18 years and their duties were clerical or domestic. Compared to over 2 million men, the corps of 11,500 women was small, but recruitment was always hampered by caste and communal inhibitions. Indian women at that time did not mix socially or at work with men, and a large part of the corps was formed from the mixed race Anglo Indian community. The women operated switchboards and similar duties at airfields and air headquarters. In 1939, the British Indian Army numbered 205,000 men. It took in volunteers and by 1945 was the largest all-volunteer force in history, rising to over 2.5 million men.
During World War I, over 1 million Indian troops served overseas, of whom 62,000 died and another 67,000 were wounded. Ypres was the theater of war, with 5 of the deadliest battles fought amidst the red poppies in Ypres line. Over 130,000 soldiers of the Indian Corps, consisting of 2 cavalry and 2 infantry divisions, fought in the Flanders fields. Over 9,000 perished, a few went missing, never to be found, dead or alive. The Menin Gate is not the only memorial to soldiers who went missing during the 1914 to 1918 war. Names etched in black on a wall of the Menin Gate Memorial to the missing in Ypres, Belgium. Just names, no faces, no address, not even the date the soldier gasped for his last breath on the battlefront. On the gate, 55,000 names are etched. Amidst, there are names of 410 Indian soldiers who fell to the enemy in Flanders Field during First World War. In the Ypres Bedford Cemetery, where nearly 5,000 graves are neatly arranged, there are 21 tombstones dedicated to Indians, 14 known and 7 unknown soldiers. Names are etched on the known tombstones. Prayers inscribed in Arabic or Gurmukhi. The unknown graves have one-liners, known unto God. That is all. The dead soldiers, only known to God. No epitaph on the tombstone. Not even a flower in the memory.
The Commonwealth War Graves Commission is an intergovernmental organization of 6 independent member states whose principal function is to mark, record, and maintain the graves and places of commemoration of Commonwealth of Nations military service members who died in the 2 world wars. To this end, the war dead are commemorated by a name on a headstone at an identified site of a burial or on a memorial. War dead are commemorated uniformly and equally, irrespective of military or civil rank, race or creed. Benghazi was an important goal for both Allies and Axis forces during the Western Desert Campaign of 1942 and 1943. There are now 1,214 Commonwealth servicemen of the Second World War buried or commemorated in Benghazi War Cemetery. 163 of the burials are unidentified. Benghazi War Cemetery has the graves of 40 Indian soldiers killed in World War II. A name that reflects among the graves is that Amar Singh of Tutu Mirza in Hoshiarpur. He joined the British Indian Army in 1942 and sent off to North Africa as Lance with his regiment, the Royal Bombay Sappers and Miners.
The contribution of Indian soldiers in the world wars can be seen in the lands of the Axis powers as well. About 40 kilometers from Berlin lies the Zahrenstodt Indian Cemetery, which is one of the largest cemeteries from the First World War in Eastern Germany, Europe. Far away from the homeland, this place has become the final resting place for 206 Indian soldiers who died in captivity and were buried here. It contains the graves of soldiers and sailors from the forces of undivided India, and they died at the prisoner of war camp 3 miles away at Jossin. To be specific, we find 227 members of the 4th Lahore and the 7th Meerut Army. After the reunification of Germany in 1919, this place was finally visible after the removal of the undergrowth, and the Commonwealth War Grave Commission took up the restoration on this place and finally completed in 2005. Thank you.
I'm gonna explain about the memorial that is built in the memory of the Indian soldiers in UK. Chatri, a memorial on the Indian soldiers in UK. The Chatri is a memorial on the Sussex South Downs to Indian soldiers who died whilst in Brighton during the First World War. Hindu and Sikh soldiers who died whilst in Brighton were taken to a burning ghat situated on the Downs near Patcham, where their bodies were cremated and their ashes were scattered into the sea in accordance with appropriate rites. After the war, the Chatri Memorial was erected on the site of this ghat. It was unveiled by the Prince of Wales in a ceremony on February 1st, 1921. The Chatri bears the following inscription in Urdu, Hindi and English: "To the memory of all Indian soldiers who gave their lives for their King Emperor in the Great War, this monument, erected on the site of the funeral pyre where the Hindus and Sikhs who died in hospital at Brighton passed through the fire, is in grateful admiration and brotherly affection dedicated." Since June 2000, a commemorative service has been held annually in honor of the Sikh and Hindu soldiers who died in Brighton during the First World War. The structure has Grade II listed status, reflecting its architectural and historic importance. In 2017, as part of the 100th anniversary of World War I, the Chatri was built at the exact location where the funeral pyres were constructed for the cremation of the 53 soldiers. The dome and its 8 pillars are built from white Sicilian marble. The 3 large granite slabs lie over the original concrete crematory bases, and the design symbolizes the protection offered to the memory of the dead.
The cemetery is located in Trikiduluri, Malta, an island located south of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea. We find the memorials dedicated to the Indian soldiers as far as Malta. One such is the Pieta Military Memorial at Malta. There are 1,303 Commonwealth casualties of the First World War buried or commemorated at Pieta Military Cemetery, including 20 Indian servicemen who were cremated at Lazaret. Second World War burials, number 166. Most of the soldiers here have died fighting war or deceased at the Battle of Gallipoli.
The village of Neuve-Chapelle is southwest of Lille, France. The Indian Memorial at Neuve-Chapelle commemorates over 4,700 Indian soldiers and labourers who lost their lives on the Western Front during the First World War and have no known graves. This location of the memorial was specifically chosen as it was at Neuve-Chapelle in March 1915, where the Indian Corps first had its ever major action as a single unit. On the lower part of the column, the words "God is great, He is the victory" are inscribed in English but also in texts being Arabic, Hindi and Gurmukhi. The column is surmounted with a lotus capital, the imperial British crown and the Star of India. 2 tigers are carved on either sides of the column, guarding the Temple of the Dead.
Lily stamp commemorating the Battle of Haifa. At the Battle of Haifa, the 5th Cavalry Division were formed by 3 brigages, the 2 British Indian Army cavalry regiments, one of which was usually Lancers, part of the Desert Mounted Corps. There were 3 cavalry regiments from the Indian princely states, Jodhpur, Mysore and Hyderabad. As you can see here, he is the hero of Haifa, Major Dalpat Singh. The Haifa Memorial is also placed at the Teen Murt Bhavan at the Delhi. The Jodhpur Lancers commander Major Dalpat Singh Shekhawat, who was immortal in the battle, was posthumously awarded the Military Cross. The Jodhpur and Mysore Lancers are now represented by the 61st Cavalry Regiment in the Indian Army and still commemorate the battle every day on 23rd September as Haifa Day. Thank you.
Continuing Kohima War Cemetery is a memorial dedicated to the 2nd British Division of the Allied Forces who died in Second World War at Kohima, the capital of Nagaland, India in April 1944. In March 1944, the Japanese 15th Army attacked the British troops stationed at Kohima and Impal in the northeast India with intent to prevent an attack on Burma. In the first week of April 1944, the Japanese attacked at Kohima and Impal from the Indo-Burma border to destroy the supply bases of the British. They laid siege on the Allied forces stationed at Kohima and also at Impal. The Japanese 15th Army occupied a strategic location on the Garrison Hills and continually attacked a small contingent of the Commonwealth forces, which successfully held their ground until the reinforcements were brought in.
The India Gate, originally the All India War Memorial, is a war memorial located astride the Rajpath on the eastern edge of the ceremonial axis of New Delhi, formerly called Kingsway. It stands as a memorial to 70,000 soldiers of the British Indian Army who died in between 1914 to 1921 in the First World War in France, Flanders, Mesopotamia, Persia, East Africa, and elsewhere in the Near and the Far East. The cornice of the India Gate is inscribed with the imperial suns, while both sides of the arc have India flanked by the dates 1914 on the left and 1919 on the right. Below the word India in capital letters is inscribed. Thank you.
As described by my friend, the India Gate stands tall as a memorial to Indian soldiers of World War One. Their remarkable contribution is recognized in form of an inscription on this monument. The corners of the India Gate is inscribed with the imperial suns, while both the sides of the arch have India, flanked by the dates 1914 on the left and 1919 on the right. Below the word India, in capital letters, is inscribed to the dead of the Indian armies who fell and are honored in France and Flanders of Mesopotamia and Persia, East Africa, Gallipoli, and elsewhere in the Near and the Far East, and in sacred memory also of those whose names are here recorded and who fell in India or the northwest frontier and during the Third Afghan War.
And today I'm going to tell you about some of the books that were written about Indian soldiers in World Wars I and II. There is an enormous collection of books that speak about the role of the Indian soldiers enlisted in the British Army during the First and the Second World War. I am going to highlight the specific ways in which the contributions of these Indian soldiers are remembered through books. The first book is The Indian Army in the Two World Wars, edited by Kaushik Roy. There is no single volume which covers the Indian Army's experiences during the two world wars. This is what the present edited volume attempts to do. This collection of 17 essays analyzes the Army as an institution and also touches upon the cultural ethos of the Army and related social issues. The book describes the cavalry divisions used by the British, named as the Indian Expeditionary Forces. It covers exhaustive details through the battles of Somme, Mesopotamia, and Egypt for the First World War. It looks upon their training for the war and the weaponry used by them. The book further discusses the campaigns from deserts in North Africa to the jungles of Burma in the Second World War. It further delves into the Indian Army and its ethnic divisions and has a chapter dedicated to Sikh regiments during the Second World War. The next book is Farthest Field, an Indian story of the Second World War by Raghu Karnad. Through the personal stories of three young men from his own family, Karnad, a journalist, unfolds India's little-known World War II story. The prose and sweeping narrative are both novel-like and make for a gripping read. World War II was different from World War I in many aspects, of course, but for Indians it was also the first time that many who were college-educated had become officers less out of financial necessity and more from a desire for glamour and adventure. The book mostly follows the 5th Indian Infantry Division fought in Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Libya, and Egypt from 1940 to 1944. But Karnar also shows us that many Indian soldiers and officers did not actually fight enemy forces. Rather, they worked towards maintaining the British Empire and even the domination of certain Indian classes over others. Next is India at War, the Subcontinent and the Second World War by Yasmin Khan. A historian and professor, Khan reveals not only the personal stories of many individual Indian soldiers and their families, but also how this war shaped social, economic, and cultural changes across all of South Asia. Khan also goes deeper into what happened to the families the Indian soldiers left behind at home to face hard labor, starvation, disease, steep price inflation, and much more. Beyond the descriptions of campaigns and battles, she gives us the lives of people across all walks of life: peasants, politicians, businessmen, seamen, brothel owners, English memsahibs, and prisoners of war. In particular, she describes how the Bengal famine of 1943, which killed more than 3 million people, was a direct result of World War II and thus caused the greatest number of war-related mass casualties that India has ever seen.
As my friend just explained about certain books which are written based on World War One and World War Two, here we'll be seeing such more books. The first book is India's War, World War Two and the Making of Modern South Asia by Srinath Raghavan. This book draws us into the many battles both abroad, that is West Asia, North and East Africa, and Europe, and at home, showing how and why World War Two helped end colonial rule in South Asia. It covers a wide arc from Gandhi's early support of Britain's war efforts to the Burma campaign. Prior to his distinguished academic career in the UK, Raghavan spent 6 years as an infantry officer in the Indian Army. So his descriptions of frontier actions and battles, including some rather obscure ones, are vividly brilliant. It is also marvelous that, in this hefty volume, he manages to dive deeper into war economics than most other books on the list to reveal how, toward the end, the British owed India an unbelievable $1.3 billion. The second book is The Indian Spy, the true story of the most remarkable secret agent of World War II by Mihir Bose. This is the story of a quintuple spy, a Hindu Pathan from British India, who worked for Britain, Italy, Germany, Japan and Russia. His espionage adventures and daring escapades ought to be a movie by now. Codenamed Silver by the British, Bhagat Ram Talwar is known in India for his role in helping Subhash Chandra Bose escape to Germany to get Hitler's help to free India from the British. However, beyond the daredevilry, Talwar played a much larger role in the global war by playing the British off the Germans of the Russians, and so on. In this British intelligence services, he worked under Peter Fleming, brother of Jan Fleming, who famously created James Bond. Talwar was so highly regarded by the British that they awarded him handsomely at the end of the war with a house, money and more. The Germans rated him highly too, awarding him the Iron Cross. The third and the last book is The Spy Princess, The Life of Noor Inayat Khan by Shrabani Basu. A descendant of the legendary Indian ruler Tipu Sultan, Khan was a Muslim princess and had a quite dashing, daring spy life in wartime Europe before the Nazis captured, tortured and shot her to death at Dachau. She was only 30 years old and, tough to the end, she did not give away any of her secrets. Her final word was liberty.
I take up from my friend and would like to present a few more books written in the memory of the Indian soldiers during the First World War, one by an Indian author and the other by a Western author. Let me begin by speaking about the book by Mrs. Sharbani Basu. For the King and Another Country, Indian Soldiers on the Western Front, 1914 to 1918. The First Great War changed the world forever, causing the collapse of the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian and the Ottoman Empire. Over 1 million Indian soldiers fought in it. The biggest challenge for historians trying to uncover India's World War I story is that most of the soldiers were illiterate. The few literate soldiers who did manage to write letters back home painted a very different picture of trench welfare and how the wounded were treated than we might assume from the letters of European soldiers. There are several shocking details in the book, and for me, none more than so than the fact that some Indian soldiers were no more than 10 years old. Shocking revelation, isn't it? Here's another book by Jordan Corrigan. Sepoys in the Trenches: The Indian Corps on the Western Front 1914 to 1915. As a commanding officer in the Brigade of Gurkhas, Corrigan is a military historian and a compelling storyteller, weaving together a narrative and from interviews and archives across India and Nepal. Here he gives us the troubles and heroics of the Indian Corps of two infantry divisions and a cavalry brigade, all fighting against enemies they hardly knew for a cause that they were not their own. It was their very unthinkable conditions that our brave Indian soldiers participated in the war that was not their own, but they did not deter from their duty. This is how I will choose to remember the numerous Indian soldiers of the world wars.
The Indian soldiers were remembered through newspaper reports as well. Since we were colonized by the British, a report also defines the duty of the soldiers who were to fight in these two deadly wars. The Daily News report on the sick soldiers, dated 1914, gives a glimpse of the use of Indian soldiers in the First World War to defeat the German forces. We can understand this by the use of the term Kaiser, meaning king in German. This headline gives out the message clearly that every soldier of the British Expeditionary Forces was expected to perform their duty to the fullest in whichever position they are sent at.
As my friend rightly highlighted, the contributions of the Indian soldiers were recognized through honors which got reflected in the newspapers of those period. The third picture focuses on the recipient of the biggest honor in military bestowed upon by the British to their soldiers for exemplary performance. This soldier is flashed in the newspaper for his outstanding task. Altogether, these go on to show the contributions of the Indian soldiers in the line of duty even though being ruled themselves. It also shows evidence of their sincere work, which finds a reflection in the popular newspapers of the time.
Thank you.
This is a diary. It's a way to remember the contribution of the Indian soldiers. We find very few evidences as their own handwritten diary notes. We come across very little such as information from them. In Bhagat Singh's life, the last 2 years in jail before his death, Bhagat Singh and his comrades fought one of the most hated court battles in the annals of India's national liberty struggle. He also put spotlight on inhuman conditions political prisoners faced in colonial jails. He died at the age 24. His heroism made him an icon and figure of inspiration for generations to come, and these are one of its pages. Even this too is a diary note from the old times. This one is in Bengali language, and the word Netaji is clearly read from the first line. The writer speaks about his experience serving as a soldier of Indian National Army under Subhash Chandra Bose. It remains as one of the treasures from scanty diary notes available from the period.
As my friend described, the Indian soldiers who fought from faraway lands during the First and Second World Wars were hardly literate to write letters. Sending them back home was another story altogether. From whatever we searched, I came across one postcard where we find the name of 33rd Punjabis and a clear mention of prisoner of war. The next letter is in Urdu and it seemed to be of a similar kind. What is reflected of these scanty documents is that the fact that the soldiers who fought the world wars were hardly access written materials to reach their words and conditions back home. It speaks volume on the hardship faced by the numerous soldiers without uttering a word. Thank you.
Remember the contributions of Indians who served in the two world wars in one more way: commemorative stamps. These were issued by the Indian government to honor these brave hearts who had given up their lives without any acknowledgements of their contributions. Through this presentation, my friends and I remember them and express our heartfelt gratitude for the freedom we enjoy all over the world today. Thank you.
Our soldiers who gave up their lives fighting for oppressors and colonizers, the British, are very valuable subjects for films. They have often been depicted through various historical films. But today, I would like to present before you one movie about an Indian soldier in World War I that highlights his courage in the face of well-armed enemy and his grit to fight till the last. It speaks volumes about the overall contribution of the Sikh regiment under the British, whose contribution cannot be washed away. In contrast, the big Hollywood movie on the evacuation of British and French forces at Dunkirk, France had a sizable number of Indian soldiers equally stranded like the other forces. But through the entire movie, it does not find a single mention. It is known through many interviews that at Dunkirk, it was the grit and resilience of the Indians which stood out in face of the enemy's bombardment. Unfortunate, nevertheless, it is a reality that the contribution of Indian soldiers at World War is downplayed.
Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, The Forgotten Hero, is a 2004 Indian epic biographical war film written and directed by Shyam Benegal. The film depicts the life of the Indian independence leader Subhash Chandra Bose in Nazi Germany, 1941 to 1943, and in Japanese occupied Asia, 1943 to 1945, and the events leading to the formation of Azad Hind Force. It details on the Hitler-Bose meeting and highlights his disappointment at the hands of Hitler. The film charts his journey to Japan in the submarine. The pact with Japan results in the forces of Japan and INA to fight the British in India in the Battle of Kohima and Imphal. The film ends with the surrender of INA after Japan surrendered and concludes with the INA trials.
There has been a growing trend of movies towards the historical plots. In that category, the most recent of the web released was The Forgotten Army, Azadi Ke Liye. The series is directed by Kabir Khan. The series is based on true events about the men and women in the Indian National Army, INA, led by Subhash Chandra Bose. The Forgotten Army, Azadi Ke Liye, is based on true stories of Indian soldiers who marched towards the capital with the war cry, Chalo Dilli, to gain Indian independence from the colonial rule. The Indian National Army, INA, which was born out of the soldiers who defeated the Empire of Japan during the World War II, was led by Subhash Chandra Bose and had the first women's infantry regiment since the Russian units of 1917-1918. While the soldiers, consisting of both men and women, fought against all the odds to gain India its independence, their struggles and stories somehow got lost and they became the Forgotten Army. With the love story between two soldiers, Sodhi and Maya, at the heart of it, the series raises several questions about identity, independence, and the idea of motherland and the cost of freedom. Freedom that we often take for granted, but freedom that costs countless lives and sacrifices. Fighting to keep freedom alive is often more difficult than fighting to gain freedom.
In World War I, Indian soldiers in the British Army fought in various places around the globe. I am presenting the experts of documentary on this topic. As per B.S. Neji, son of Subedar Darwan Singh Neji, informs us that those days it was trench warfare. War was face to face. His father was a section commander at that time, a Naik or corporal. He recalls that on the night of 23rd and 24th November 1914, when in an attack they killed 7 to 8 Germans in a trench. In return, he was severely injured on his head and was profusely bleeding. but he said that so long as the trench was fully captured, I will not leave my position. He was later awarded Victoria Cross by King George V. This was the kind of bravery shown by many such Indian soldiers who sacrificed their lives for the British, who were fighting against imperialism but never cared that they have themselves colonized India.
Republic Day, Delhi. Indians celebrate this day to mark the liberation from the British through the beating retreat ceremony. But 60 years ago, this was an army under the British command which was the biggest volunteer army in the history of world. During the Second World War, 500,000 men volunteered to serve in the British army. This was an army that some British chose to ignore and forget. But the stained glass at Sandhurst tells a different story. During World War II, Indian troops fought across 3 continents under the Union Jack. They were at Dunkirk, Monte Cassino, Italy, and Greece. They fought to save British democracy even though themselves were under British rule. We can't really believe that we could have won the war without the Indian army. India would have been overrun by Japan, they would have linked up with the German in Iran, and the world would have come under the domination of Axis powers. Such was the contribution of the Indian Army in the Second World War, which we are reminded of the bravery and sacrifice of these men denied themselves the comfort of life which we enjoy today. We salute and bow to them in regards.
Over 3 million men served in the First World War from the Commonwealth. About 1.5 million men came from pre-partition India. About 74,000 lost their lives, and the 11,000 that remained were awarded the Victoria Cross. We have with us the former Army officer, Thumenda. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. As I just mentioned in my introduction about the 1.5 million men who joined us in World War I from South Asia, do you think we're doing enough to remember them?
No, I don't think we're doing enough to remember them, these men who came from every village, every community from the then undivided India. These people are now spread across Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, and they mostly came as volunteers. They joined our armed forces out of a sense of duty and honor, and of course, they were young men. They had a great spirit of adventure. We must remember that in situations like the early days of 1914, it was the Indians who held the line, which otherwise would have been broken by the German forces.
Okay, so considering that these men were under colonial rule, do you think that the Commonwealth leaders should apologize for the wrongs of the past?
Certainly, I think we must apologize for some of the wrongs of the past, and Prime Minister David Cameron did apologize, but it is most important to recognize the contributions of these Indians. There are many things that we have done together, and it is very important for most of us to remember that there is no British history without India, and there is no Indian history without the British. We are really two countries have grown up together, and considering that we share a past, share the same democratic ideals and the same values such as the rule of law, a free press that are not found in as many countries as we would like today, it is time that we look forward to continue to grow together in the future.
I deeply admire your thoughts and share the same. And I would like to sign off quoting the words of Sir Nicholas Soames, one of the grandsons of Sir Winston Churchill. They died with their face to the foe. Truly, it is time that the Western world recognize the contribution of India in the world war as put forward by Tom. Hopefully, the academic world will see many interesting studies in this regard. Thank you for being with us and sharing your views.
It is with immense pride that I shall showcase the ultimate recognition of the contribution of the Indian soldiers in both the First and the Second World Wars. The top among those was the recipients of the Victoria Cross. Here are a few of those who received this recognition. Isha Singh was the first Sikh soldier to receive the Victoria Cross award. He received the award in the year 1921. Abdul Hafiz received the Victoria Cross Award at the age of 18 in the year 1944, making him the youngest recipient of the award in the British Army. Khudadad Khan was the first recipient of the Victoria Cross. He received it in the year of 1914. Mir thus received the Victoria Cross Award in the year 1944. He fought in the 55th Cork Rifle in Belgium. Yashwant Gadge received the Victoria Cross Award in the year of 1944. He fought in the 5th Maratha Light Infantry in the Upper Tibble Valley, Italy. Premendra Singh Bhagat received the Victoria Cross Award in the year 1918. He fought at Galabat, Abyssinia. This is a picture of the Victoria Cross Award. Thank you.
India, as a country, has always been proud of its past. We value the contribution and the sacrifices of great people who have shaped the country's future. It is with this regard in our hearts that we preserve the memory of our soldiers who had participated in the two world wars in memorials and museums. This Indian War Memorial Museum was set up as a tribute to the soldiers who had participated in the world wars in India and abroad on behalf of the British. Nawab Khanna, musical house of the Red Fort, was chosen to accommodate the museum in its first and second floors. In the gallery number 2 and 3, we find a collection of the helmets, armors, different types of swords, daggers used in the wars displayed. The bomb fuses, shells, models of pistols, bullets, and gunpowder flasks on display give a vivid picture of the arms and ammunition used during the First World War. The last two galleries show the impact of European industrialization over the weapons and communication since radars, telephones, telegraph, signal lamps, guns with periscope, trench periscope, etc. were introduced during the war.
कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा खुशी के गीत गाए जा ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा कदम कदम बढ़ाए जा खुशी के गीत गाए जा ये जिंदगी है कौम की तो कौम पे लुटाए जा ओ सरफरोश की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए कातिल में है ऐ मेरे वतन के लोगों जरा आँख में भर लो पानी जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी जरा याद करो कुर्बानी तुम भूल न जाओ उनको इसलिए सुनो ये कहानी जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी जरा याद करो कुर्बानी ऐ मेरे प्यारे वतन ऐ मेरे बिछड़े चमन तुझ पे दिल कुर्बान तू ही मेरी आरज़ू तू ही मेरी आबरू तू ही मेरी जान ऐ मेरे प्यारे वतन ऐ मेरे बिछड़े चमन तुझ पे दिल कुर्बान ओ तुझ पे दिल कुर्बान.
Friends, as we come to the closure of our Project Day presentations, I would like to share a thought with all those who are with us today. On the whole, this was a very short glance at the innumerable sacrifices made by those Indian soldiers who have faced the two deadliest wars the world has witnessed in the 20th century. Thereafter, the United Nations organization was formed in 1945 as an international body to prevent any more wars and to promote international cooperation among nations. It is time that we recognize those sacrifices and bow down to sincerely remember those numerous soldiers from yesteryears till date who guard our freedom. This is not the end, but the beginning of our realization that the freedom we enjoy today has come at a cost of lives by those who have laid their lives not only for our dear motherland, but also were at the service of the most ruthless colonizers the world has witnessed. Still, they were determined to lay their lives in the line of duty. Even if the whole world forgets their heroic deeds, let us be the ones to carry forward the contribution of those valorous souls in future.